Where are you coming from tonight, sir?
Dinner with a colleague, just down the road.
Do you mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?
I do not consent to any searches, officer.
The heavy rain against the windshield of Marcus Thorne's silver sedan sounded less like a storm and more like a clock ticking down to a deadline he was already missing. It was 10:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, a stretch of road where the streetlights are spaced just far enough apart to leave pockets of absolute blackness between them. Marcus, a defense attorney who spent his days dissecting the Fourth Amendment in air-conditioned courtrooms, was now living the reality of a suspicious vehicle call, staring at the blinding white strobe of a police cruiser in his rear-view mirror. He wasn't thinking about his law degree. He was thinking about how his hands were gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly as his father had taught him 20 years ago, and how the simple act of breathing had suddenly become a conscious, laborious effort. The night had started at a dimly lit diner called the Rusty Spoon, a place where the coffee is burnt and the vinyl booths smell of industrial cleaner. Marcus was sitting across from his lead investigator, Elias Vance. Elias was a retired detective with 30 years on the force, a man who wore his cynicism like a well-tailored suit. They were there to discuss a high-stakes narcotics case, but the conversation had drifted, as it often did, to the mechanics of modern policing, the ambient noise of the diner, the low hum of a refrigerator unit, the distant clatter of a waitress stacking ceramic plates, and the rhythmic thump-thump of the ceiling fan provided a grounded backdrop to their debate. Marcus had been arguing that the line between proactive policing and unconstitutional overreach was becoming a blur, while Elias, stirring a cold cup of coffee, maintained that in the heat of a midnight patrol, the law is often a luxury. It's about the hunch. Marcus, Elias had said, his voice gravelly and low, you can call it bias, you can call it a mistake, but a beat cop calls it survival. They see something that doesn't fit the pattern, and they pull the thread. Marcus had countered that pulling the thread without reasonable suspicion wasn't survival, it was a violation. He didn't know then that within the hour, he would become the thread being pulled. As Marcus drove away from the diner, the rain intensified, blurring the neon signs of the suburban sprawl. He was focused on the road, his mind still looping through legal precedents. When he saw the blue and red lights crest the hill behind him, there was no siren, just the silent, aggressive flickering that demanded immediate compliance. He pulled over onto a narrow shoulder, the gravel crunching under his tires. The silence that followed was heavy. He rolled down his window just enough to let in the smell of wet asphalt and the distant, muffled sound of a police radio, a rhythmic, digital chirping that signaled the start of a Terry stop. Officer Derek Miller was the man stepping out of the cruiser. Miller was 32. A 5-year veteran with a clean record and a mindset shaped by warrior training seminars, told Miller. The world was divided into predators and prey, and his job was to sort them out. As he approached Marcus's car, his flashlight beam sliced through the rain, hitting the side mirror and bouncing back into Marcus's eyes. Miller wasn't looking for a criminal. He was looking for a reason. He had received a call about a dark-colored vehicle circling the neighborhood, a vague report from a nervous homeowner that barely met the threshold for a welfare check, let alone an investigative stop. But Miller had a feeling. He noticed Marcus's suit jacket hanging in the back, the expensive leather briefcase on the passenger seat, and the way Marcus's eyes didn't quite meet his. In Miller's mental database, overdressed and nervous equaled out of place, license and registration. Miller said, his voice flat, professional, but carrying an edge of practiced authority. He didn't explain why he had stopped him. He didn't need to, not yet. Marcus reached slowly for his glove box, narrating his movements. Officer, I'm reaching for my registration now. It's in the compartment. He felt the absurdity of it. A man who argued before judges now forced to narrate his life to a stranger with a Glock 17 on his hip. As he handed over the documents, Miller's flashlight lingered on Marcus's hands, then panned over the interior of the car. "Where are you coming from tonight?" So Miller asked. "Dinner with a colleague. Just down the road at the diner." Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He knew he didn't have to answer, but he also knew that silence was often interpreted as a challenge. "You're a long way from the city center for a Tuesday night." Miller noted. He was fishing. He was looking for reasonable suspicion, articulable facts that would justify a further detention. He noticed a small plastic pill bottle in the center console. It was ibuprofen, but in the low light, through a rain-streaked window, it was a potential controlled substance. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Miller said this was the moment the legal boundary began to fray. Under Pennsylvania v. MIMS, an officer can order a driver out of a car for safety. But Miller wasn't thinking about safety. He was thinking about the pill bottle. He was thinking about the suspicious vehicle call. He was escalating based on a series of assumptions that were rapidly hardening into a false reality. Marcus stepped out into the rain. The cold water immediately soaked through his dress shirt, the fabric clinging to his skin. He felt small. He felt exposed. "Officer, may I ask the reason for this stop and why I'm being asked to step out? We had a report of a vehicle matching your description involved in some suspicious activity in the area." Miller said, his hand resting near his belt, "I just need to make sure everything is on the up and up. You mind if I take a look inside the car?" "You do mind." Actually, Marcus said, his professional persona finally clicking into place, "I do not consent to any searches unless you have probable cause or a warrant. I'd like to be on my way." The atmosphere shifted. The rain seemed to get louder, the splashing of tires on the nearby highway sounding like a dull roar. Miller's jaw tightened. In his mind, a no was an admission of guilt. Why would an innocent man refuse a search? He signaled his partner, Officer Sarah Jenkins, who had been standing by the cruiser's door. Jenkins was younger, more hesitant. She watched as Miller moved closer to Marcus, his body language becoming more imposing. "You're being very difficult for someone who says they haven't done anything wrong." Miller said he reached for Marcus's arm, intending to move him toward the back of the car. "I'm going to conduct a pat down for weapons." Turn around. This was the procedural mistake. A Terry pat-down requires a reasonable belief that the person is armed and dangerous. Marcus was a middle-aged man in a soaked dress shirt, hands visible, cooperating with every verbal command. There was no bulge in his pockets, no aggressive movement. But Miller's bias, the assumption that this man didn't belong here and was hiding something, overrode the constitutional requirement. As Miller's hands moved over Marcus's ribs and waist, the line wasn't just crossed, it was erased. "I'm an attorney." "Officer," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly from the cold and the adrenaline, "I'm telling you right now, you do not have the legal basis for this frisk. Everyone's a lawyer on the side of the road." Miller muttered. He felt something hard in Marcus's pocket. He reached in another violation, as a pat-down is limited to a search for weapons, not an evidentiary search, and pulled out a heavy metal business card holder. He flipped it open. The silver reflecting the strobe lights, inside were cards that read Marcus Thorne, senior partner, Thorne and Associates, criminal defense. The silence that followed was absolute. Miller looked at the cards, then at Marcus, then back at the cards. The predator he thought he had cornered was actually the man who made a living holding people like Miller accountable, but Miller didn't back down. To admit a mistake now was to admit liability. He doubled down. He ordered Marcus to sit on the damp curb while he verified his identity, a process that took another 20 minutes of Marcus sitting in the mud while the rain poured down his back. The turning point didn't happen on that dark road. It happened 3 days later in the office of Police Chief William Henderson. Henderson was a man who prided himself on community policing. but he was also a man who hated losing. He sat behind a mahogany desk, watching the body cam footage from Miller's vest. On the screen, the perspective was warped. The fisheye lens, making Marcus look larger and more threatening than he was. He was being argumentative. Chief, Miller said, standing at attention in the office, he refused to cooperate. I had a report of a suspicious vehicle, and I saw what I believed to be narcotics in the console. Henderson narrowed his eyes. He watched the footage again. He saw the moment Miller reached into Marcus's pocket. He saw the lack of any furtive movements from Marcus. He also saw the timestamp. The stop had lasted 48 minutes. For a suspicious vehicle call that turned out to be a man driving home from dinner, 48 minutes was an eternity in the eyes of a judge. The pill bottle was ibuprofen. Miller, Henderson said, his voice dangerously quiet. And the suspicious vehicle call, the caller described a black SUV. This man drives a silver sedan. Did you even check the CAD report before you initiated the frisk? Miller stayed silent. He hadn't checked. He had seen a car, seen a man who didn't fit his internal map of the neighborhood, and let his assumptions drive his procedure. The consequences weren't immediate, but they were corrosive. Marcus Thorne didn't sue for money. He sued for discovery. He forced the department to turn over Miller's past stop data. The numbers told a story that Miller himself hadn't even realized. He was writing a pattern of investigative stops that overwhelmingly targeted people of color in affluent neighborhoods, most resulting in no charges and consensual searches that were anything but. The local news picked up the story. The headline wasn't about a violent police beating. It was about the quiet erosion of rights. It featured the image of Marcus, a respected member of the bar, sitting on a wet curb in a $1,000 suit, looking broken. The public scrutiny was intense. Miller was placed on administrative leave, his reputation within the department tarnished, not because he was a bad cop, but because he was a liability. The department was forced to undergo a federal audit of its stop and frisk procedures, a process that cost millions and took years, but the real damage was internal. Officer Jenkins, Miller's partner, ended up resigning 6 months later. She told the internal investigators that she had seen the mistake happening in real time, but felt she couldn't speak up against her senior officer. The blue wall hadn't protected them. It had just trapped them all inside a failing structure. Months after the incident, Marcus Thorne sat in his office, looking out at the city skyline. He had won his settlement. He had seen the policy changes, and he had seen Miller leave the force. But every time he saw blue lights in his rearview mirror, his heart rate spiked. Every time he passed the diner at night, he felt a phantom chill on his neck. The law is a series of lines drawn on paper, meant to keep us safe and keep us free. But those lines are only as strong as the people who walk them. When a professional, be it a lawyer or a police officer, allows their internal bias to rewrite the rules in the dark of night, who is the law actually protecting? If the person being stopped that night hadn't been an attorney with the resources to fight back, would we ever have known the line was crossed? And more importantly, how many times has that line been crossed tonight? While you were listening to this story, in towns just like yours,